So my next question, and again, we don't have to go in order here. What are the top 3 priorities that you would recommend to the legislature that would jumpstart small business in Rhode Island? Maybe start with John this time, or Neil, we'll start that way.
My very quick 3 are, one has to look at the business climate, the overall economic conditions within Rhode Island, and the cost of doing business in the state. It's a large category that I think we have to continue to fundamentally look at that, and not the one-offs, but to make changes. We've started a little bit on some of the tax issues, the cost of doing business, and those are governmental control costs. We've looked at the unemployment, for instance, and the rates, they've been reduced, sales tax on utilities. We need to look at that as one of the major issues that needs to be revisited every year to make sure that the foundation of our economy, the climate, is neutral to people's decisions about whether they come here or not. The second part would be on the government itself and the effectiveness and efficiency of the government. We believe that there are some issues that need to be done. All of the tools that are provided, we want to make sure that those are well done and well intended. There was some article today about one of the tools that was used, and what's the effect of that tool. So we need to make sure that that works well in conjunction with changing the underlying economy. And then last but not least is education. I think here when one looks at Massachusetts or elsewhere, there was a recent study just published about where we sit with other states, and we do not do very well on maybe the ability to grow the education system, the outcomes, the testing. We are probably the 23rd best on education, but we're like the 6th highest in spending. So we are not getting a real return on the education dollars for our education system. And that's just not K-12. I believe that it's pre-K all the way up to 20. It's workforce training, etc. There needs to be more alignment, more unity of that system of education. We've started a little bit of that work on career tech, but that needs to be, I think, enhanced and continued.
Terrific, thank you. Lynn?
Yeah, I was thinking about this when I saw the questions ahead of time, kind of cheating, but one of the things I'd like to see, and I mentioned in my opening comment, that Rhode Island's government needs to learn crisis mode. One of the things that would really help all of you a great deal, the small business people, if we would go after regulations in crisis mode, because that's a substantial part of why the cost of doing business in Rhode Island is so high. I mean, what I find disturbing, I don't take a lot of the 50-state comparisons very seriously. They're really just adding apples and oranges. But you have different surveys with very different criteria and weightings all coming to the same conclusion, that we're not a very good place to do business. We're not where we need to be. So my first recommendation, that's kind of tied with my other one, is that we need to go into crisis mode to really improve regulations. And we're going to have to do that anyway, because at the national level, that's going to start occurring anyway. We'll stick out even more. Secondly, as John said, education. And I think that's absolutely critical. Whenever our Commerce Corporation looks at education, or looks at development deals, whatever, we need to have education and the skills of our labor force explicitly there, present and taken into account, because a major part of the cost of doing business deals with the skills of the labor force. And I would actually argue, and I've been arguing, that's one of Rhode Island's most glaring weaknesses, the lack of skills of our labor force. My third recommendation, which I'm a little bit scary to make, is that we should, based on computer surveys, really keep pace with and keep in touch with small businesses. Through a series of surveys, we could get results, we could tabulate them across different industries, make things better. My hesitation is because, although Rhode Island thinks of itself as a high-tech state, we don't do very well with computers. I don't need to point out DHS, whole new operating system, bombs away. We don't need to test it, Anyway, you look at some of the other places, DLT, the problems they had, DMV, it just goes on and on. But ultimately, we're a small state. When do we start acting that way? So I'd like to see those 3 things.
I'd like to follow up. You said to go after regulations in a crisis mode. What would that look like? What would that feel like?
The opposite of what Governor Chafee did. He appointed all of 2 people, one of whom resigned. We have a lot of regulations. You need to really have legislative panels. You need to have groups with expertise evaluating really the kinds of regulations we have, looking at ways which ones are obsolete. If they're obsolete, get rid of them. If they're not doing a good job, can we improve them, whatever. It's just a very in-depth analysis of the whole thing from top to bottom, because part of it, and both John and Neil have talked about this, Rhode Island really needs to reinvent itself in a positive way, because we now have several more years before the next recession, and we're not ready yet. And I think that's front and center.
Well, that's not very encouraging, is it? So maybe we can work on that today and figure that part out. Neil?
Yeah, that's fine. Again, benefit of going after the expert. So number 3, education. Number 2, I'll make it number 1, and it's the one we all agree on, that we need to have better education for every single student, and we need to raise the bar. And I'll go on the hook, no matter what city or town you come from, and you can think you have the best education, you are not competitive nationally. You could think you live in the greatest country in the world for education. We are not competitive internationally. We are middle of the pack in the industrialized world with public education, K through 12. It's facts. You can look it up in 5 minutes. We need to do better to compete. We need to raise it. What was good enough for a lot of us ages ago is not good enough for our kids. It needs to be inclusive. It needs to bring in everybody in every way. It's not as simple as a computer in every classroom. It really is embracing better quality education, achievement-oriented, and college or career-ready. The second thing, again, a little overlap, the environment, and how do you address the environment in businesses? What Glenn said, listen. So we urge the legislators, not that they're not, but we continue to listen to the businesses. And putting the onus on the businesses. Business, whoever that is, cannot afford to sit back and complain about what's going on Smith Hill if you're not willing to participate and speak up and talk about what businesses need. And I think it's that collaboration, and I agree with the urgency to have a battle plan. Let's put Rhode Island on the moon. I mean, it's that kind of thing that we need to do. And I think the third thing, again, the previous theme is let's look at the demographics of this state. Very exciting that we have a reinvigorated Hispanic chamber starting now. We need to look at what this state looks like. You know, the thing with electric boat that everybody talks about, those are long-term contracts. Electric boat needs workers who are 3rd or 4th grade right now. So if we do not train, if they don't get out of high school trained for what electric boat needs, if they don't get some additional education, they can't pass the drug test 15 years from now. They're not going to get the job, or electric boat will find somewhere else where they have the job. So the urgency, the education, and then imploring the legislators, our representatives, to dialogue, as many of you do, to not only listen, but push the business community to say, here's what we do.
Thank you. I want to dig just a little bit deeper, since all 3 of you have education as a priority area. In your mind, what does that look like? How could we deepen that? And I know that you had mentioned a few things, but it's very kind of neat that all 3 of you had said that in the top 3. So just kind of an open-ended question, ideas about how to strengthen the education system.
Yeah, I guess we could go on for a little while. Part of it, the simple answer is to just take a look at Massachusetts. I hate using that as an example, but we looked at the Massachusetts model versus the Rhode Island model. We looked at not just the number of hours of teaching, but we looked at the structure of the 2 systems and what they do in Mass, and what they've been doing, the continuity of it for 15 or 20 years. They do very simple little things. They have a common core, the standards and assessments, they're all connected, they're unified, they're aligned. And then they went into curriculum and they aligned it to the standards and the testing. And they did professional development and they did teacher evaluation. They're all aligned. They look at those alignments all the time. We in Rhode Island take a different approach. We have a common core standard, the same as Mass. The test is the same as Mass. What we did not do was to align the curriculum professional development with the rest of it. So we have an unaligned system. We have 36 curriculums. For every school district has a separate one for math, for reading, and for writing. So we don't know whether we actually teach the way in the classroom itself. When you look at all of the tests or the analysis that we have on the rankings, it says that we do funding well, we do structure well, but in between we don't do well. So we don't align it. We have 36 different ways of teaching math. For instance, if you go into Rhode Island or you go into Central Falls and Pawtucket and Providence, those 3 which have a high mobility rate, they all teach it differently and at different times. So what's now needed to be used, that is something that was done. There was a Maury bill passed last year in the session. It's now ongoing. to require the Rhode Island Department of Education to actually do the curriculum alignment, do the local school administration, which Mass does better than we do. They have school-based management, we don't. They're going to try to go to those processes. So I think that's the simple starting point. It's not about a matter of money. We actually spend $300-400 per student more than Massachusetts does. We have similar standards as Mass, so I think if we look at Mass as a very simple example, and if we can marry as much of that from Massachusetts as we can in Rhode Island, we would be substantially better off than we are.
Yeah, I agree with John. I think it's, it's aspiration. We need to do better. We need to have higher goals. We need accountability. We're talking about, are we meeting them, are the kids meeting them, are the teachers meeting them, are the principals meeting them, are the parents meeting them, and then we need to stay the course, as he said. It was struck by one thing when the Common Core standards were first announced, and you can debate whether those are any good or not. There's a lot of politics. The minute they were announced, the Rhode Island reaction across the board was, those tests are going to be a lot harder than ours, and our kids are not going to do as well. The immediate reaction in Massachusetts was, we don't want to adopt it because those tests are easier than the MCATs in Massachusetts and their standards. That, to me, said it all.
And I was wondering, I saw in educational rankings, again, those 50 state comparisons, adding apples and oranges, that we've actually moved up. Our high school graduation rate is higher. But I'm not sure, maybe they would know, to what extent is our graduation rate higher because we've lowered standards? And, that's something, and we have 36 school districts. Now you can say, well, geez, Rhode Island's such an incredibly large state, that has to be the case. I mean, it's just silly. We're a small state that acts the size of Texas. We've never heard of economies of scale. There's just a lot of things that we could be doing, we should be doing, and at this point, we've been a post-manufacturing economy 30 years. It hasn't changed, and you have to wonder, what will it actually take for that to change? Now, I can honestly say, being in the trenches, unlike my fellow participants here, we get the high school grads at URI, and let me state for the record that their math abilities have really slipped. I think a lot of my colleagues and I sometimes talk about, we can't believe how ill-prepared they are for math, and we're not talking calculus, even basic algebra. Writing ability has slipped. I mean, we want to make all these deals. We want to really get the economy going, but we seem to have two separate things about, yes, we're going to generate all these jobs, but we're not guaranteeing or providing an adequate mechanism to say we're going to have an adequately skilled labor force. And remember, that also adds to the cost of doing business. Hiring, training, retraining, all of it. I don't have to tell anyone here that. So that's what really has to change. And you're right, Massachusetts, they made tough standards. They had the courage to stick with them. We haven't. I'm not from Rhode Island, I sometimes think that our state's motto, hope, is based on our unofficial motto, everything's negotiable. And I just think we've got to stop that. We've got to make tough decisions. We've got to stick with it, even if it hurts, because high school diplomas should not be an entitlement. We're not going to be providing enough skilled labor. And that's going to mean you might get the jobs, you're not going to keep them. That's not where we need to be.
Thank you for that follow-up.